Hello everyone. I'm making this video because I want to share some thoughts on prayer with you. Currently, we are in the beginning of December, getting ready to close out this year of 2018, and personally it's a time where I reflect on this entire calendar year. And it's been a pretty rough year for me personally. Some of the bigger things that have happened, there was in the beginning of this year in February, my wife and I, made the decision, felt that we were being called more being called to leave our home in Hanoi, Vietnam. It was a place where we moved to 2 months after getting married. We were married, and 2 months later we were living overseas, and so it was the place that we got to call our home and the place where we started our lives together. And then it was in February this year that we felt God was calling us to leave that space, leave that place. And so this year, 2018, has been a time of loss. It's been a time of listening, and it's not all of those things are very easy to go through all the time. Another reason why this year has been difficult for me personally is because I've had some ongoing health issues that started while I was living overseas in Vietnam, and they've just been continuing to go on even after returning to the States. Currently I'm on 3 types of medication trying to figure things out, so it's been really rough not being able to feel 100% healthy and well for 4 or 5 months, almost 6 months now. So as I reflect on 2018, it's been a very difficult year, and this being connected to prayer is because this is connected to prayer because we as Christians are encouraged first by Paul, looking at his letter to Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. He encourages those believers there in that community to be in constant prayer. And I feel like that goes for the good times and the bad times, the times where it's really rough and difficult. And we can look at the words of Christ. He tells us to always pray and to never lose heart. And after I reflect on this past year, it's easier said than done. I feel like we can all think of times in our lives where it is easier said than done to be in an attitude of prayer, because surely we all have had patches or seasons in our lives that life just beats us down and we just get trashed by so many of the things that happen to us in our lives, to the point where we really just want to curl up in a ball and try to isolate ourselves from everything that's been going on and everything that's been so difficult. We just want to hide in a corner and get away from it, find some separation in that way. But Christ tells us to never lose heart in our prayers. And so I want to look at one passage specifically where Jesus said to not lose heart and to pray at all times. And that passage is in Luke 18, is verses 1 through 8. And it is a parable. It's known as the parable of the widow and the unjust judge. And basically the way this parable goes is that Jesus says in the city there is a widow and there's a judge. And this judge who's in the city he identifies him as a man who does not fear God and has no respect for people whatsoever. And this widow, who's also in the city, is involved in some kind of lawsuit of some kind. She talks about how in verse 3 she says to the judge, "Grant me justice against my opponent." And so there's this conflict. She's seeking help from this judge, and she goes before this judge again and again and again and again. And so At first, Jesus tells this parable and he says this judge refuses, because we have to remember he's a man who does not respect people. He's probably only concerned with himself. But eventually, the parable goes that this man grants this widow the justice that she's requesting. And it is more so that he grants this request of this widow for the sake of not being bothered by her anymore. She just pesters him again and again and again with these requests. And he says, enough, okay, I do not fear God, I have no respect for anyone, but I will grant you a request. So hopefully you will not continually wear me out over time. And so as we look at these two characters, this widow and this judge who is unjust, as the parable says so many times throughout, makes it very clear that this judge is not just. This widow and her prayer, her request that comes before the judge repeatedly, that is us as we come before God. Our prayers take shape in this request, this continual request. And so after that part of the story of the parable, when the judge grants this widow this request, the voice of the Lord comes in, and it says, listen to what this judge says. And the text even says, listen to what the unjust judge says. Even the voice of the Lord identifies this judge as unjust. And God says, he says a rhetorical question here. He says, and in verse 7, and will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? So I think of God saying, if this judge here, who is unjust, grants the request of this widow coming before him again and again and again, what more will I, Yahweh, the one who seeks to bring about the deliverance of those who cry out to me day and night, how much more will I listen to those requests that are made again and again and again? And after this voice comes into the parable, Jesus kind of ends the parable and Jesus speaks in to the scene. And in verse 8, he says, I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Jesus says he will quickly grant justice to them. That yes, God listens to those cries day and night, but he will listen to them and he will grant justice quickly. And to me, thinking of my reflection of this year, 2018, even going back beyond that with my health issues, that the challenge to me personally and us as Christians is, what does quickly mean when we lift up our prayers on a consistent basis to the Lord? I think we like to be selfish in those times. We want we lift our requests up to the Lord, and we want God to be like a genie and make everything right, everything to be cotton candy and rainbows, everything to be perfect in our eyes, just at the snap of a finger. And I think one challenge that this brings to us is that we see things in a very short-term, finite perspective. Jesus and God, Yahweh, being eternal. What does quickly mean in the scope of eternity is the question that I've come to ask. That maybe that justice that comes quickly in their perspective is justified whenever we want things to be made right with the snap of a fingers tomorrow. It may not come. We may have to pray continually over time. But we can know in this promise that we have from God and in this parable of understanding what it means to pray and not lose heart, that we have a promise from the Lord, from Jesus, that justice will come quickly. And so I want to close that with a note as we are beginning the month of December, and this past Sunday, yesterday, was the first Sunday of Advent. And as you can see the Christmas tree behind me, we meditate on these themes of Advent, of hope, love, joy, and peace. And so I just want to offer a few final words as we pray to this God with these themes of hope, love, joy, and peace, that we know that we pray to a God who has given us hope that these tough times won't last forever. Justice will come. We know that we pray to a God who loves us. He loves us to the point of death, ultimately death. And we can say that we know that we pray to a God who has given us the promise that if not here on earth, we will one day experience that ultimate joy and peace. And so with that, I hope that we can, as believers, stay in prayer even in the tough times, and to never lose heart, remembering those promises that we have in God and Jesus. Thank you.